They tore my wedding dress not once, but twice. And on the happiest day of my life, the person who gave birth to me punched me in the face. In front of everyone, I was bleeding, humiliated, and heartbroken. But what they didn't know was that punch didn't break me. It woke me up. My name is Erica, and I'm 28 years old. I never imagined that my wedding day, the day I had envisioned since I was a little girl, would become the stage for one of the most painful yet empowering moments of my life. Growing up, I was never the favorite. My younger sister Mira was the one everyone's eyes followed, beautiful, bold, and always outspoken. Our mother, Marcia, adored her to the point where it often felt like I didn't exist in comparison. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the so-called plain daughter who focused on studies, work, and keeping the peace at home. But peace, I've learned, often comes at the cost of your own voice. For years, I tolerated the subtle jabs, the comparisons, the way Mira would say things like, "You're lucky to even have a boyfriend." It hurt, but I swallowed it. I worked hard, built a stable career, and focused on my own life. Then came Jake. From our first conversation, he treated me like I was enough, more than enough, in fact. He respected my opinions, encouraged my goals, and stood by me when my family didn't. After 4 wonderful years, he proposed. It was simple, heartfelt, and perfect. And for the first time in my life, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be the center of attention. Planning the wedding became a dream come true. We chose a peaceful venue just outside the city of Brookhaven, surrounded by gardens and soft lights. The flowers, the guest list, the music, I was involved in every detail. But nothing mattered more to me than the wedding dress. Since I was a teenager, I had dreamed of walking down the aisle in a white gown that felt like magic. I spent months saving and finally chose a handcrafted designer piece, made with layers of soft tulle, custom lacework, and the most delicate pearl detailing I had ever seen. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth it. Jake had smiled when I showed it to him and said, "If this is the one that makes you feel like a queen, then it's perfect." Of course, Mira had something to say when she saw it. She sneered and said, "It's all right, I guess. But don't you think it's a bit much for someone as understated as you?" I brushed it off. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, not anymore. This wedding wasn't about their judgment. It was about love, hope, and a new beginning. Or at least, that's what I thought. As the wedding day drew closer, the air around me grew thick with excitement, and something else I couldn't quite name. A nervous energy clung to me, not just from the pressure of perfection, but from the presence of my family, particularly Mira. She had returned home for the festivities a week before the ceremony, and though she smiled for photos and made polite conversation, there was always a sharpness beneath her words, like a blade wrapped in velvet. At one point, while we were going over the table arrangements, she leaned in and said with a sweet voice that barely masked her venom, "You know, I'm honestly surprised Jake went through with this. You're not exactly what men usually dream of marrying." I stared at her, stunned. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, but before I could speak, our mother Marcia walked into the room. She didn't scold Mira, she never did. Instead, she placed her hand on Myra's shoulder and said with a warm smile, "Oh, honey, you always know how to lighten the mood." I swallowed my frustration and kept my focus on the wedding board in front of me. For years, this had been the dynamic. Mira would belittle me, and Marcia would either laugh it off or, worse, praise her for being honest. What hurt the most wasn't just their words, it was their unity against me. No matter what I did, how much I achieved, or how hard I worked to please them, I was always the one they looked through, not at. But I had Jake. I had his family. His mother, Vivian, was everything mine wasn't: gentle, wise, and genuinely kind. When she saw how overwhelmed I was during the menu tasting, she took my hand and said, "You don't have to be perfect for everyone, Erica. Just be happy for yourself." Still, it was hard to stay above water with the constant backhanded comments Mira made. When Jake and I had our pre-wedding photo shoot at the cathedral, Mira tagged along, uninvited, and hovered near the edge of every frame. making disapproving faces. I asked her gently to step aside. She laughed and said, "Relax, I'm just making sure your pictures aren't too boring." Later that evening, I caught her scrolling through photos of me in my wedding dress on her phone, zooming in and smirking. "You think this really suits you?" she muttered when she thought I wasn't listening. I looked her straight in the eye and said nothing. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten to me. But deep inside, I felt a chill, a warning. Marcia, too, had started acting strangely. She seemed distant during dress rehearsals and was far more concerned with Myra's seating arrangements than mine. During dinner, she'd whisper to relatives about how over-the-top the ceremony was becoming. I tried to let it go. I wanted to believe that somehow they would come around, that on the day of the wedding, they would be proud of me. I had no idea how wrong I was. The morning of my wedding was a mixture of nerves and excitement. The sun rose gently over Brookhaven, casting a golden hue across the garden where the ceremony would take place. My bridesmaids were already getting ready in their suite, while I made my way to the bridal dressing room, a quiet, private space reserved for me alone. My heart fluttered with anticipation. Today, I would finally wear the gown I had dreamed of since I was a girl. But when I reached the door, something unexpected happened. As I turned the knob, the door flung open from the inside. Standing there, casually zipping up her handbag with a smirk on her face, was Mira. "Mira? What are you doing in here?" I asked, confused and instantly alert. She shrugged with feigned innocence. "Oh, I thought this was the restroom. Weird layout in this place, huh?" Her tone was light, almost mocking. I stepped past her, heart pounding. Something felt off. As she walked away, she added over her shoulder, "Kind of a shabby room, don't you think? But then again, it suits you." The moment I entered, the air was knocked out of me. My eyes locked onto the spot where my wedding dress had been hung with such care the day before. Now, it lay torn and ruined, lace shredded, silk slashed in angry lines. I stumbled toward it, unable to breathe. The hand-embroidered pearls were scattered across the floor like fallen hope. I stood frozen. The room felt like it was closing in on me. A staff member from the venue poked her head in, then gasped. "Oh my God, what happened?" I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "It was fine yesterday. Mira, she just came out of here." The staff's expression shifted. "She told us she was planning a surprise for you. She asked everyone to give her a few minutes alone." I didn't need more evidence. The truth had already wrapped itself around me like ice. With shaking fingers, I pulled out my phone and called Mira. "What now?" she answered casually. "You were in my dressing room. You destroyed my dress," I said, my voice barely steady. "Are you still hung up on that thing?" "It looked awful anyway," she said, laughing bitterly. "Maybe this is divine punishment for your arrogance." "Why would you do that? What did I ever do to deserve this?" I asked, choking back tears. "What a hassle," she scoffed. "Do you have proof it was me? Go ahead, accuse me in front of everyone. See how that plays out." And then she hung up. I stood in silence, my fingers still clutching the phone. My dream, the symbol of my journey, my joy, my identity, had been taken from me by the person who shared my blood. I wanted to scream, to collapse, but just then a soft knock came at the door. It was Vivian. She took one look at the shredded gown and came to my side without hesitation. "Erica, who did this?" I didn't have to answer. She knew. She saw it in my eyes. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she gently placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "I had a feeling something like this might happen. That's why I brought something else. Something I wore on my wedding day. It's not just a dress. It's a piece of history." I looked at her, confused. "You brought a backup?" Vivian nodded. "It's a haute couture gown. Italian silk, hand-beaded crystal lace. It was worth over $400,000 when it was made. We've kept it preserved all these years. I always imagined passing it on to someone who would cherish it." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Vivian, I don't know what to say." She smiled. "Say yes. Put it on. Walk down that aisle with your head high. Don't let anyone steal your light today. And just like that, hope returned to me. Not through the dream I thought I needed, but through a woman who believed in me when my own mother wouldn't. I took a deep breath, wiped my tears, and said, "Let's do it." The sun was now fully up, pouring light through the stained glass windows of the outdoor chapel as soft music echoed across the venue. My heart beat like a drum beneath my ribs, but I felt a strange calm washing over me. I had cried. I had grieved the dress I had chosen with so much care. But now, as I stood before the large wooden doors ready to walk down the aisle, I wasn't thinking about what had been taken. I was thinking about what I still had: love, dignity, and the power to rise above it all. My father, Thomas, stood beside me, arm outstretched, his eyes glistening. "You look breathtaking," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. I gave him a small smile. "It's not the dress I planned to wear, but maybe it's the one I was meant to wear." The doors opened slowly, revealing rows of seated guests, soft petals on the stone path, and at the end, Jake, my rock, my love, standing tall in his gray tailored suit, eyes locked on me. I saw his breath hitch as he took in the sight of me. The gown, Vivian's legacy, shimmered like moonlight. Its Italian silk hugged my figure with regal precision, and the lace detailing along the sleeves and hem danced with every step I took. The crystal work on the bodice caught the sunlight in 100 places, casting delicate sparkles along the aisle. A long lace veil trailed behind me, and atop my head sat a tiara Vivian had tucked into my hand minutes before, whispering, "You deserve to feel like royalty." As I walked forward, the gasps among the guests were unmistakable. But I didn't let my gaze waver, not until I passed the front row and spotted Mira sitting on the left, next to Marcia. Myra's face was frozen in disbelief. Her mouth hung slightly open, eyes wide with shock. She had expected me to walk in, humiliated or in a makeshift dress. Instead, I walked in like a queen. Marcia sat beside her, expression unreadable, but I saw her grip tighten on the edge of her seat. When I reached the altar, Jake took my hand. His voice was low, filled with awe. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Under the veil, I smiled. "You don't even want to know the morning I had." He chuckled softly and squeezed my hand. The ceremony began, and though the weight of what had happened still clung to me, I stood tall, grounded by Jake's love and Vivian's quiet strength. We exchanged vows under the dappled sunlight, surrounded by flowers and music, and when the officiant declared us husband and wife, we kissed, gently, tenderly, with a promise in that moment that nothing would break us. As we turned to walk down the aisle as newlyweds, flower petals floated through the air. Just before we passed Mira and Marcia, I caught a glimpse of Mira twisting the edge of her handkerchief until it tore. Her face was pale, lips trembling. But I didn't look away to gloat or to shame her. I simply walked on, head held high. This day wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming joy. I had every reason to fall apart, but I didn't. I showed up, I stood tall, and I chose love over bitterness. The garden transformed into an evening dreamscape as the reception began. Twinkling lights strung above the tables shimmered in the golden hour glow, and soft music floated through the air. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the space. Guests mingled with joy, and waiters moved about with trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne. For a moment, everything felt like a fairy tale, but I knew the storm hadn't passed yet. Jake and I had just finished taking group photos, and I stood near the center of the reception area, talking to some of his extended family, still wearing Vivian's exquisite gown. It fit perfectly, as if it had waited all these years for me. The compliments kept coming, and while I smiled humbly, I noticed Mira standing off to the side, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Suddenly, she stormed forward. "Why are you wearing such a fancy dress?" she demanded, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "That veil, that tiara, and this gown, who do you think you are?" Conversations around us faded into silence. "You shouldn't be the one standing out," she continued, her voice rising. "I'm the pretty one. I always have been. But now look at you, flaunting something that was never yours to begin with." I tried to stay calm, but I could feel the tension rippling through the crowd. Mira, I said evenly, you already destroyed my dress this morning. Why are you still doing this? She took a step closer, eyes full of resentment. You mean that rag you call a dress? That wasn't even worth saving. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak, she reached out, and in front of everyone, grabbed the hem of my gown and ripped. A collective gasp echoed around us. The tearing sound cut through the silence like a blade. Mira had pulled with such force that the lower part of the silk skirt now dangled, damaged beyond repair. Embroidered lace and crystals littered the floor. I froze, stunned, disbelief coursing through me. Tears welled in my eyes, not just for the damage she'd done to something so valuable, but because she did it without shame, without care, right in front of Jake, his family, and our guests. I couldn't stay silent. I stepped forward and shouted, my voice trembling with fury. What is wrong with you, Mira? This is a $400,000 dress. Vivian trusted me with it, and you've ruined it. Again. Before she could answer, a sharp voice cut through the tension. It was Marcia. How dare you speak to your sister like that, she screamed, pushing through the guests. She reached me in seconds. Mom, she just tore my dress. Again, I said, backing up, unable to believe what I was hearing. But Marcia didn't stop. Do you think you're some kind of princess now? Wearing another woman's dress and talking back to your own sister on your wedding day. Then, before I could react, Marcia raised her hand and punched me straight in the nose. A sharp, burning pain exploded across my face as I stumbled backward, catching myself on the edge of a chair. Blood rushed to my nose. My vision blurred for a second, not from the force, but from the shock. Everything went completely silent. A few guests screamed. Jake ran to my side, shouting my name. I pressed my hand to my nose, feeling the warm trickle of blood, too stunned to cry. You're insane, Jake growled at Marcia, shielding me. What the hell is wrong with both of you? Before anyone else could say a word, Jordan, the venue manager, came rushing over. He looked at me, saw the blood, then turned to Mira and Marcia. I'm calling the police, he said, voice firm. And an ambulance. This ends now. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights appeared at the venue's gates. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the hushed crowd like a warning bell. Guests stepped back, murmuring in shock, some with phones in hand, others frozen in disbelief. Jake held my hand tightly as I sat in a chair, a damp towel pressed against my nose by one of the staff. The bleeding had slowed, but the pain pulsed dully, not just from the impact, but from the betrayal. My own mother had struck me. In public. On my wedding day. 2 uniformed police officers and a pair of paramedics entered swiftly. Jordan, the venue manager, met them and guided them toward me. The paramedics approached first, one kneeling beside me with calm professionalism. We're going to check for swelling and make sure there's no fracture, he said gently, scanning my face with a small flashlight. Do you feel dizzy? I shook my head. I'm okay. Just sore. I don't want to go to the hospital. Please, just treat me here. He nodded in understanding and began cleaning the wound. Nearby, the officers were already separating Mira and Marcia from the guests. Mira was fidgeting, her expression twisted in a mix of defiance and panic. Marcia, on the other hand, looked proud, still riding the high of her assault, as though it were justified. She provoked me, Marcia shouted as one officer began questioning her. She insulted her sister. Jordan stepped forward firmly. That woman, the mother, punched the bride in the face. The other, the sister, ripped her wedding dress in front of everyone. We have multiple eyewitnesses and venue surveillance. The second officer approached me with a notebook. Ma'am, I'm very sorry you're going through this today. Would you like to press charges? Jake squeezed my hand. I looked at the shredded fabric still clinging to my skirt, the blood on my veil, the disbelief in the eyes of the guests, and I nodded. Yes. I'd like to file a formal complaint for assault and property damage. I have witnesses, and I want this recorded. The officers wasted no time. Mira was the first to be handcuffed. You can't be serious, she shrieked. It was just a stupid dress. The dress she's referring to, Jake cut in, voice cold, was worth over $400,000. And it wasn't even the first one she destroyed today. Marcia was next. She tried to pull away, screaming, "You can't arrest me. I'm her mother." "Yes," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "and today, you proved exactly what kind of mother you are." Gasps rose from the guests as the officers read them their rights. Cameras flashed. Several relatives whispered amongst themselves. Others looked visibly uncomfortable, but no one stepped in to defend them. Not this time. As the squad car doors closed behind them and the flashing lights began to fade, I sat still, heart heavy but chest lifted. I had stood up for myself. I had spoken the truth. And for the first time, the world had listened. The paramedics finished cleaning my face. One of them handed me a mirror. My nose was red, slightly swollen, but not broken. I looked at my reflection and saw more than a bride in pain. I saw a woman who refused to be silenced again. Jake leaned in and kissed my forehead. "You're incredible, you know that?" "I just did what I had to do," I whispered back. They tore the dress, but not my dignity. The courtroom was quiet except for the steady tapping of the judge's gavel and the soft shuffle of papers. It had been 6 weeks since the wedding, 6 weeks filled with statements, interviews, legal documents, and endless reflection. I hadn't returned to my family's house once since that day. I hadn't received an apology either. Not from Marcia, not from Mira. And at this point, I didn't expect one. Jake stood beside me in court, his hand in mine, steady and grounding. Vivian sat behind us in the public gallery, her calm gaze locked forward, ever composed. She had accompanied me to every meeting with my lawyer, every pre-trial hearing, and every appointment to assess the value of the ruined dress. The prosecution laid out the case clearly. 2 charges against Mira, intentional destruction of property and disorderly conduct. 1 major charge against Marcia, aggravated assault in a public setting, with multiple eyewitnesses. And then, there was the matter of damages, the financial cost of the couture dress that Mira had torn apart, not once, but twice. Vivian testified to the value of the gown, presenting professional documentation proving it had originally been purchased for over $400,000, crafted with rare Italian silk and Swarovski crystal lacework. The surveillance footage from the venue, which Jordan had wisely preserved, was submitted into evidence. It showed Mira approaching me and ripping the dress. It showed Marcia striking me in the face. The courtroom saw everything. Mira tried to play the victim. Her lawyer claimed it was an emotional outburst, that she had felt overshadowed and acted in the heat of the moment. But the judge didn't buy it. Marcia was worse. When asked if she regretted her actions, she doubled down. "She embarrassed our family," she said, pointing to me. "She needed to be taught respect." The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Ms. Marcia, what you did wasn't discipline. It was assault, committed in public, on your daughter's wedding day, and with no remorse shown even now." When the verdict was read, I held my breath. Mira was sentenced to 3 months in jail and ordered to pay full compensation for the destroyed gown, with structured installments to begin immediately. The court placed a civil lien on her income until the debt was paid in full. Marcia's sentence was harsher, 1 full year in prison, with mandatory anger management classes and a court order prohibiting any direct contact with me unless approved in writing by the court. The gavel came down, and it was over. I let out a slow breath, not out of relief, but resolution. It wasn't about revenge. It was about being heard, finally, after a lifetime of being silenced. Outside the courthouse, reporters hovered, hoping for a statement. I gave them only 1 line before walking away. They tore my dress, bruised my face, and tried to break my spirit. But all they really did was set me free. In the weeks that followed the sentencing, I found myself breathing differently, deeper, freer, as if the weight I had carried for years had finally been lifted. There were no more calls from my mother or sister. No manipulative messages, no guilt trips pretending to patch what was never whole to begin with. The silence was unfamiliar at first, but it was peaceful. And in that peace, I began to rebuild. Vivian, ever graceful and composed, suggested I take time off to recover emotionally. But instead, I asked if we could visit her storage unit, the place where her treasured bridal collection had been kept. Inside, we found not only sketches, fabric samples, and preserved gowns, but memories. Vivian had once dreamed of opening a boutique, but life had taken her in another direction. When I told her I wanted to bring that dream to life again, not just for her but for myself, she didn't hesitate. That very month, we signed the lease on a small studio in Brookhaven. We painted the walls a soft pearl white, installed custom shelving for lace, silks, and crystals, and set up a fitting space that felt like a sanctuary. Together, we named it Second Bloom Bridal, a tribute to the idea that beauty can rise again, even after devastation. Jake helped with the setup on weekends, even though he was juggling his own work. He was proud of me. Every time he looked at me, it wasn't just with love, it was with admiration. We moved into our new home, and though it was modest, it was filled with warmth, laughter, and the promise of a future untouched by past bitterness. The first bride who walked into my studio reminded me of myself. She was quiet, unsure of her beauty, clutching a photo of a dream dress she thought she couldn't afford. I listened to her story, her insecurities, her hope, and then I helped design something just for her, something that made her light up when she looked in the mirror. I'll never forget the way her eyes filled with tears when she said, "I've never felt this confident before." It was in that moment I understood. This was more than business. It was healing. Each dress I worked on, each bride I empowered, stitched over a wound I didn't realize was still raw. I wasn't just helping others step into their power, I was reclaiming mine. One day, as I locked up the shop and stepped outside into the soft glow of the afternoon sun, Jake met me at the sidewalk with 2 cups of coffee and a knowing smile. "How's my favorite bridal designer today?" he asked, leaning in for a kiss. Exhausted, I laughed, but in the best way. He handed me my cup, and as we walked home hand in hand, I looked up at the sky and felt, truly, finally, whole. It's strange how life folds in on itself. A day that started with shattered silk and shattered trust turned into the beginning of something extraordinary. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if things had gone smoothly, if Mira hadn't ripped my first dress, if Marcia hadn't raised her hand against me in front of 100 people. Would I have still found the strength to say, "Enough"? Would I have still realized the power of choosing myself? I don't carry bitterness anymore. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've outgrown it. I have built something real out of the ruins they left behind. I've turned hurt into art. Every stitch I sew into a bridal gown, every design I create, is born from the fire they tried to drown me in. And that gown, Vivian's heirloom, it now sits displayed at the entrance of Second Bloom Bridal, not for sale, but as a symbol. A reminder that when someone tries to destroy you, your resilience can become your finest adornment. Beneath the display case, there's a small plaque that reads, "This dress was once worn by a bride who stood tall when others tried to tear her down." Her story reminds us, dignity cannot be unraveled. The community I once felt invisible in now sees me not as someone's daughter or someone's sister, but as Erica, the woman who stood up, spoke out, and turned pain into purpose. Marcia is still serving her sentence. Mira, I've heard, struggled to find employment after her record became public. She's moved out of state, and from what little I've gathered, she keeps a low profile now. I haven't spoken to either of them. I don't need to, because the truth is, they lost far more than I ever did. They lost a chance to grow, to reflect, to love. And I gained myself. Sometimes brides ask me if I've always loved weddings. I smile, because the answer is layered. I tell them, I didn't always believe I belonged in a gown like this. But one day, I walked down the aisle wearing something I didn't choose and realized I had become someone stronger than I ever imagined. And now, every time a woman steps into my studio, doubting her worth, thinking she's not enough, I help her find the mirror, adjust the lace, lift her chin, and say, "You don't have to wait for someone else to make you feel special. You already are." They may have torn my dress. They may have punched my face, but they could never touch my spirit. I am Erica. I am 28. And this is the beginning of everything. Thank you so much for staying with me through this journey. Sharing my story wasn't easy, but I hope it reminded someone out there that no matter how much pain others try to bring into your life, you can still rise above it. If this story moved you, or if you found strength in it, please make sure to like this video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life stories. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me keep telling stories that matter. I'll see you in the next one.